Stephen Edward Ambrose was one of the most important and controversial authors of U.S. military history, known to have been a biographer of U.S. Presidents Dwight Eisenhower and Richard Nixon. He was born in Illinois, Decatur, on January 10, 1936, but grew up in Whitewater, Wisconsin. He graduated from Whitewater High School and later earned his Ph.D. He taught history at several universities from 1960 to 1995. A World War II expert, he published over 20 volumes, including D-Day, June 6, 1944, Pegasus Bridge, the biography of Eisenhower, and Citizen Soldiers. He founded the Eisenhower Center and was president of the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, Louisiana. In the 1980s, he was also director of the Eisenhower Center at the University of Orleans. He collaborated in the movie Save Private Ryan and was executive producer of the Band of Brothers miniseries based on his book. A long-time smoker, he was diagnosed with lung cancer in April 2002. His health deteriorated rapidly, and 7 months after the diagnosis, at the age of 66, he died. One of his most successful books is Band of Brothers. The book, published for the first time in 1992, tells the story of Easy Company during the Second World War. It analyzes the 1,095 days from December 1942 to July 1945 of the 147 soldiers who were part of Easy Company, 506th Paratrooper Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. Ambrose retraces the history of these boys from training in military operations to post-war careers. Easy Company had its baptism of fire on June 6, 1944, on D-Day in Normandy. Afterwards, the boys fought in Holland and Belgium, led the counterattack on the Ardennes, entered Germany and conquered Hitler's Eagle's Nest in Berchtesgaden. Ambrose's book is classified as a historical essay, but it is a compelling novel about one of the most important events in modern history. Thanks to the research work carried out by the author and the numerous interviews with survivors, the book retraces every moment of the company's formation, enriching it with the comments and testimonies of the veterans. Every language or military equipment is explained in a simple and clear way, so that those who are unfamiliar with the environment can understand what they are talking about. The story begins with the hard training at Camp Toccoa, Georgia. Our protagonists are men, or rather boys, ordinary, almost always poor, volunteers. Boys who have agreed to enlist in one of the toughest and newest corps in the U.S. Army, ready to face a very hard training for only $50 more a week. And it's a band of brothers precisely because these boys, sometimes mismatched, began their adventure in a training camp, and then, for the duration of the war and their mission, they formed a bond that was impossible to understand. From perfect strangers, they slowly became a family, real brothers, ready to defend themselves and always protect themselves at the cost of dying. The book sometimes feels like a documentary, sometimes like an adventure novel, but it is almost impossible not to identify with the protagonists and not to love them. The miniseries adapted from this book was produced by Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks, and is still considered a true masterpiece of the genre. It sublimely manages to portray on screen everything that was the Second World War, and especially everything that was for those boys in their 20s catapulted to the other side of the world with the rifle in their hands. Clearly, the book is a much more detailed story, which combines the events with technical and purely military comments, which in the series was impossible to include for obvious reasons. However, each episode opens with the memories and stories of the survivors taken from a documentary, a well-thought-out choice that allows the viewer, who has not read the book, to somehow manage to meet the protagonist and above all to understand that nothing that is about to be represented is the result of imagination. For those who have read the book, however, seeing the faces of those brave boys is an indescribable emotion, especially when, in Remember Their Brothers, those eyes full of history are filled with tears, and like a fist straight to the stomach they say, "It's true, it happened to me, I was there." I believe that the book, like the miniseries, should not be considered a simple historical documentary. Not only is what is described part of our history, of that of our grandparents, but it is the testimony of what dictatorships, the hunger for power and inhumanity can and have caused, and today more than ever it is important to remember. One of the things that stands out most in Band of Brothers is the lack of that typically American patriotism that very often turns historical tales into comic book superhero stories, where the brave Americans defeat the very bad Germans. None of this happens in Band of Brothers. On the contrary, the most disconcerting scenes, those in which real atrocities are committed, see the American soldiers as the protagonists. In one scene in particular, well described also in the book, Captain Winters kills with 2 rifle shots a German soldier, unarmed, who raises his arms to surrender and has on his face an expression of gloomy resignation, as well as the smooth cheeks of a young boy probably not even of age. An event that will haunt the captain for the rest of his life, and that, thanks also to the realism with which he has been represented, manages to enter the mind and heart of the onlooker. Stephen Ambrose tells the stories of these boys beautifully, and one of the most significant chapters in the book as well as in the series is the one about the siege of Bastogne. In the woods of Belgium, in the middle of winter, these boys had to keep the line in inhuman conditions, without winter equipment and with German artillery to keep them awake day and night. It was during this hard battle that the company suffered the worst losses, saying goodbye to boys who had fought together since training in Georgia. The camaraderie described by Ambrose produces a heartbreak that is hard to ignore. Just as it is difficult to remain impassive in Chapter 14, Hagenau, when the company, during a patrol in the German countryside, discovers a concentration camp. The description is spine-tingling, as are the images reproduced in the television series. The soldiers are confused, upset. The stench coming from the camp makes them cry and bend in two for the gags, and they do not understand what they are witnessing. This moment only is worth the whole book and the whole series. Band of Brothers is important precisely because it is not the usual war series aimed at entertainment. It is real life and it is our story. It's the sacrifice of those who fought for the freedom we celebrate so much, and that without their deeds we would never have had. It's the story of the resistance, which is always quoted and represented and which has been indispensable. And it's the story of a family fit for purpose, of those who found themselves in a camp and never looked back or left. These are the most important themes that make this work so interesting: brotherhood, freedom, sacrifice, courage. I chose this book because it tells of such an important historical moment without turning the protagonists into anonymous names with the sole purpose of describing an event. Because these guys were real people, they suffered, they dreamed, and they deserve to be remembered for what they are, not only soldiers awarded with Purple Hearts, but humans, fragile and insecure like everyone else, and with them our grandparents and all those who lost their lives to human madness. This book, absurd as it may seem, is also a hymn to peace, a cry that what happened, what this band of brothers had to face, will never happen again. For this reason, in addition to reading the essay, I recommend watching the TV series, which has not only been critically acclaimed, but is a faithful transposition of Ambrose's work, and a worthy tribute to all those who wore the uniform and died in the hope of building a better future.